Success. Welcome to episode 3 of Davos Watch, where we keep an eye on the global elites from Davos to the UN and all the other advocates of global fascism and totalitarian technocracy. This week, our story comes from Axios and their new article titled The Problem with America's High Home Ownership Rate. In this piece, author Felix Salmon, who is a chief financial correspondent with Axios and a participant of at least a few Davos conferences, writes America's decades long love affair with home ownership is holding back the economy, hobbling the Federal Reserve, and exacerbating a national housing crisis. We're stuck here now. At this point, there's just too much wealth stored in too many houses for anything to meaningfully change. The U.S. system has effectively locked millions of Americans into single homes, one that they can barely afford and might not even like very much. He goes through a couple of financial reasons why Americans would be better off if they just didn't own a home. And then he writes, Americans also take up millions of square feet of space that are desperately needed by a growing population. Can you just see can you just see right through all of this like I can? Like, oh yeah, all of this is just inefficient use of land. It could be better used if the smart people that are living at the top, maybe our academic elite or anything like that, if they had their hands on the controls, they can do it better. Like, it just smells of that stuff, and it makes me it makes me sick. But that's a side thing. So, according to Felix here, this
Also,
is
you really think, Donnie?
this is a deeply inefficient distribution of where people live. Wow. Maybe I've read too many case studies about socialism countries, but this is starting to look like a couple of maybe Cambodia or something like that, this rhetoric. But again, that's aside from this point. So he also throws in some lines about how the market is illiquid and that home ownership leads to people being more likely to be opposed to development in their area, as it might impact the value of their house, and other stories that I've seen in a number of articles that touch on this subject. But like with my previous segment on the agricultural industry that we did last week, this boils down to the idea that if you just let the elites be in charge, and in this case, give up your ownership, that the collective will be much better off and much happier. So obviously, this article caught my attention because it fits in perfectly with a now infamous article once published by the World Economic Forum titled, Welcome to 2030, I own nothing, have no privacy, and life has never been better. In this article, originally published in 2016, but since removed, author Ida Auken, a Danish politician and member of the Social Democrats political party, described a world of the future where people didn't own anything. Everything from housing and transportation to clothes and appliances were all changed into services where people just rented access to these goods or services. Imagine the Netflix model of watching media, but applied to everything. You don't own the media, you just pay a monthly fee for the privilege of accessing that media. And you might instinctively understand the problems associated with this model, but before I lay out any of those, I want to cover a couple of things of context. So, first off, this is a narrative that the World Economic Forum, their associates, and others have been pushing for a while. This Axios article is not a unique thing. I've come across a whole bunch of articles like this. There is one recently, maybe a year or so, by Carl Smith, wrote a piece in Bloomberg titled, America Should Become a Nation of Renters. Shane Phillips wrote in The Atlantic, renting is terrible, owning is worse. And the World Economic Forum has many articles about home rentals aside from the In the Future You'll Own Nothing article. Also, they have a number of articles supporting the idea of shared economies. One article we covered on this podcast was about a proposed increase in car sharing as a way to get fewer cars on the road. So there's a ton of material out on this. I'm just not going to list off every single thing. And now you might think, practically speaking, this is an infeasible idea. I think even Felix mentions this, that all of this is kind of locked into place. What can we do? What are we going to do? Outlaw owning a home? Yeah, good luck with that. But that brings me to the next point that I want to make, is that we are already seeing signs of this. We're already seeing signs that we're moving towards a rentership society. And this all kind of started in 2011, when the housing market was at its lows after the Great Recession. And there was a disturbing trend of corporations purchasing single family homes in mass and turning them into rental properties. And this trend was seemingly kicked off by a single report released by Morgan Stanley. That is an official partner, by the way, official partner of the World Economic Forum. The report, in part, outlined a shift in attitudes towards a rentership society. The report forecasted, quote, a surge in the number of renters and a potentially massive opportunity for investors to convert a glut of repossessed homes into rental properties. So prior to this report, prior to 2011, the idea of corporate landlords owning massive amounts of rental homes was just not a thing. Wasn't a thing. Maybe there was a couple of companies out there that owned a bunch of homes in an area or something like that. But this large scale, massive corporations owning thousands of homes was just not a thing. So this is a trend that's only over about a decade old, but it's starting to spread far and wide. So corporations like Blackstone, not to be confused with BlackRock, and other investment corporations began pouring billions of dollars into snatching up as many homes as they could get their hands on. We're talking about tens of thousands of homes being purchased by corporations and turned into rentals. And we have some quotes where some of these corporations are dreaming about how one day their corporation is going to own properties in the millions so that they can turn it into rentals for everybody. So then what happens if the World Economic Forum allied corporations buy up as many homes as possible? And sometimes in certain cases, especially in I think Tampa Bay area was the one that was hardest hit by this trend, that a house would go up on the market within minutes. These corporations would use an algorithm and just snatch it right up. So, what would happen if we're stuck in a system, we're stuck in a country where renting from a corporation is like the only way to find shelter? Well, there are two major things in my estimation. One is a very important thing. We're talking about financial ramifications. A house will be the biggest purchase and investment of many Americans' lives. General house appreciation has and will provide valuable equity and retirement nest eggs for millions of Americans. So in a world where we just rent, all of that, all of those benefits are just, thrown out the window. But possibly more importantly is the liberty issue. So great freedom comes along with owning a home. In general, it's your home, it's your property. You're free to do with it what you want. This freedom disappears when somebody else owns it. A good rule to remember when discussing any of these services that might replace ownership, from media and streaming services to cars and Uber, or homes and rentals, is that when you don't own something, somebody else does, and they get to make the rules. So if a landlord doesn't want you to own a pet, it's their house. They make the rules. And this goes for a whole bunch of other restrictions. There's restrictions on rental properties for smoking, hosting parties, in some case, even drinking alcohol. Landlords are given a lot of leeway when it comes to restricting certain things that their tenants can do on their properties. Now, this isn't necessarily a big issue when it comes to a free market, because if Bob, the landlord, doesn't want you to have a dog in his property, well, you just go find a different landlord that doesn't enforce such a restriction. It's when this housing is controlled by a small number of big corporations where this becomes a huge threat, especially when those small number of big corporations are adhering to a credit system like, I don't know, ESG. Under this system, massive amounts of control are forfeited to corporations and the ruling elite that construct these ESG rules. And like I've said before in regards to ESG, all of these rules are fluid and subjective. While today they might be used to mandate green homes or low flow water efficient toilets and showers in your place of residence, tomorrow they could be used to restrict you from, I don't know, possessing a firearm in your residence. And this isn't a constitutional matter we're talking about, because in the future, where you own nothing and these ESG compliant corporations own everything, it doesn't matter what the Constitution says. It's the Davos elite that are making these ESG rules, not you. So, and by the way, that idea of a landlord telling you that you can't own or possess a firearm while you're in their residence, that is very legal in, I think, at least 48 states in the country. So that is not a total, a straw man there by any means. So, like I said last time, and we'll say at the end of each one of these segments, these plans and organizations are incredibly influential and well connected. And oftentimes, the things that they do and say go largely ignored, and they go ignored at our own peril, which is why I'm doing Davos Watch every week. I intend to shine a light on some element of the global elites, and I hope you stay tuned so that you can stay informed.